let's switch right away to the third presentation, I would suggest, and I will start. So I could either share it there or here. Maybe I can try to share here. Let's see how that works. I think that's visible also in New Zealand.
Yes,
thank
can
you.
see it. Thank you.
Great. So this is a little presentation that Christina, Alexander, Robert, and myself have been trying to present, and this is more a discussion than a presentation. The problem is has been arriving on a steady basis that you ask yourself the question: how do you transmit a portfolio? How do you want to transmit this to let the student use a system that does some transmission? And one of the goals is, of course, to use AI. We all want to use AI, there's no question there, but AI is the big monster that takes everything and eats all the data. So we need to have something somewhat balanced. And the classic is, of course, this feeling of saying, I'm just a student, I got nothing to hide and everything. And then this bad feeling that universities have as a mandate, we have to respect Datenschutz. So Datenschutz, for the ones in New Zealand, is the holy word of data protection that is a lot more understood as being an administrative imperative than actually being something perceived as being useful for the society. Some people would tell you that we are slowing down the economy because of that, of course. And there is a trustable balance which can be obtained. We believe that the portfolios are something special because they mark this special humanity aspect, this individuality aspect. So people, for example, you want e-portfolios to be containing something which is, can someone look at the chat? You want e-portfolios to be somewhat, referring to your personal world. This is very important because the portfolio is about the sense making. So you have this personal aspect, which is much stronger, let's say, than just a general fluff about some theoretical things. But at the same time, you want to offer as much as possible of artificial intelligence. So you want to use as much as possible of the services. So the question is now, we want to know how we can offer to transmit the portfolio. That means we need to know how to encode. We need to know how to interface, to transfer. We need to know how to archive. We need to know all the goals and so on. So those are the 5 topics that I'm currently trying to question here: the purpose, the data, the interface, the privacy, and the landscape. So I'll just show the pictures that we have here. And I've intentionally left everything here blank so we get into a discussion and into an open discussion. So let's first start by the very simple thing. Why would you want to transmit a portfolio? And I see there is Christina trying to suggest to click something, and here every one of us can be, well, every one of us, Alex, Robert, and Christina can be clicking. So let's please hear your suggestion. Why would you want to exchange an e-portfolio with some other system?
Certification.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. So certification is the meaning that you get a mark or a badge or some credit. Okay. Yeah. Other suggestions?
For focus, so like a student can find out whether the work that they have done is actually correct in some ways, so they can get like helpful hints from AI to maybe go in this direction rather than that direction.
The purpose is further development or something like this, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you were saying? So
yeah. So you give them focus, yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Also feedback.
Feedback would be connected, definitely. Yeah. I think as a professor, when we review portfolios, we want to be helped into reviewing. So that means, I don't know, help in navigation or help in support for navigation, for example. Yeah.
One challenge is, which is touched on by our project, is to review a lot of portfolios simultaneously. So
Right.
rather than communicating individual portfolios, sets of portfolios.
I would change the word lots by masses or big data or
sets of.
Yeah.
I think it's also, and that touches on what Finlay, I think, said a bit. It could also help with surfacing information or surfacing themes. Because if you're looking back also at the CMAP that you had in your project, ISOP, I think that shows nicely where there are themes, where there are topics, areas of interest or non-interest.
And so one of the things here is indeed something we discussed is about course quality management, which is very and how can you summarize that? Well, quality evolution.
I think we should also keep in mind that e-portfolios are sometimes being used also not only in the educational system you're currently in, but you might want to use them, for instance, also for applying for a job somewhere, showing there your knowledge. And what our students often report is that they, years later, they're still referring to their own portfolios in a way as a map of knowledge.
Yep.
And this might include also some kind of an exchange, providing it to some others who are interested in this topic.
So the purpose would be remember
personal knowledge.
I think there's a key idea there, which is to preserve, actually.
Yeah, and archiving also.
Yeah.
Probably.
Some of that could be just remember. And I think this is something that many people, I even said, our quality manager at the IU one day told me, why do you want to review the quality of a course 2 years ago? Students won't remember that course at all. And well, that's exactly the kind of a challenge you don't want. If they don't remember the course, then it's too bad. We should have not done the course. But probably if they see a portfolio, if they see a work, they will remember a lot of the course, I think.
Should we add the verb present? Archive, preserve, remember, present.
Yeah. Adding a technical difficulty here.
And also probably it would be exchange or change systems. Like I want to get it out of one system and put it into another system.
Migrate.
Yes.
Yeah, this is fine. Yeah. Okay. I think this is getting fuller and fuller. I'm sure we can invent some more, but otherwise, I would rather move to the data. So here I have summarized here the data that can be the data structure, the patterns that you would see, for example, into the little blocks, and the data content, so the meaning of the data. So here the question is, typically when you write a portfolio, there is this thought of having a bunch of text, sometimes having a structure. I think this example of Padlet we had recently, you can use this kind of a vertical graphical structure of the columns. Sometimes the data has textual form, sometimes has an hypertext form. A lot of times you want embeddings, you want pictures, you want things like this.
You want to have a layout. Yes, why not?
Because then you get PDF, but I mean, you run the risk of only reaching PDFs if you want too much layout.
Well, I think it's important if I have a text referring to some photo of me teaching some kids, I want to have a photo right beside it. And or if I arrange stuff in a certain way. I mean, I know that it has to be responsive and all that, but
I mean, that's the point. Typically showing this within an interview much later, once you have put it in an archive, the PDF, will carry its appearance from the time. At the time, Times was the most used font. Everything was Times, and that's okay. You had your thing in Times. If you would present this in an interview today, people would laugh at you because this looks like old Times. Maybe they accept it, but layout has this aspect of, being very strict, and you expect a lot with layout and expect as much as e-paper.
It's totally the thing if you're doing, for example, journaling in a paper journal, the layout is key. And therefore, I think it's okay that you also have a way to look at it on other kind of platforms to like see it on a smartphone or something like this. I think layout is very important. So I insist on it. I just insist on it, even if you don't like it.
No, but I'm saying that it's a dangerous thing. So if you have this graphical layout of Padlets and you have things which are aside of each other, and when you export, you lose them because you went into some Excel cells which tries to find the parallel things.
Yes,
and it failed.
So when you lose something, but just to have, I still think we should try to preserve it.
Okay.
And, I agree with Carsten there. And that's kind of also so that we maybe not get stuck on the term layout, because that could have a very graphical element to it. That's why I added preserve connections between individual content items, because a photo on its own might not really say much. However, with the reflection going with it, that might be entered differently. It becomes it suddenly becomes this unit of evidence. So yeah, I do want to keep that in there as well.
Okay.
It's I'm not that happy with. I would agree. I mean, in terms of our rubric that we're applying for years now in our e-portfolio, the graphic design is an important factor for us. We wouldn't have it in if it's not important. So it's one aspect which we grade on, because our understanding is the competent use of media should allow you also to depict this in a well-structured e-portfolio, making use of some multimodal design elements available. So I can completely understand that for certain applications, you may restrict on the pure data and export it. But if it's, for instance, it changes the system, migrating to another system, I don't want to lose that one. It's necessary that I preserve also the design elements. So maybe we can, it makes sense to distinguish, like you do right now, Paul, between the layout, the connectedness between certain elements.
This
is structure in a way.
Yeah, this is what she was saying.
Actually, this has been a really big criticism of all the old e-learning standards like SCORM, that you always lost all of your layout, and people were mad about it.
In SCORM,
yeah.
But you can embed all the CSS you want in SCORM and HTML.
Mostly you don't get it back what you had in your other system. So you imported it and then it does not support this, right? And
okay. Interesting.
Is LaTeX another example for something like that? You never get what you want.
No, on the contrary.
but maybe let's go on and then, for example, metadata. For example, metadata is very important. When was written at what date, from whom, at what location, and so on and so on. So metadata is.
license information also belongs to metadata. I would like to add traces of interaction and collaboration, maybe some peers that commented on my content.
Yeah. But you want that separately?
Maybe you can decide whether you want to.
Metadata. Because that can be quite a big component if you're looking especially into feedback.
No. I'm saying whether when you present it, you want this to be simply included into the portfolio as part of the presentation, or do you want this to be a separate object of the transmission?
You can copy it separately,
Okay.
transport it separately.
And then you can show it as you like it.
Yeah, as you
in the
like it.
system.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. For some reason this
Did you add commentary in the interaction? It's not just
collaboration was there, so I think
and
this
commentary.
comments.
The last item that I added there, preserve private and public information, kind of was prompted by Alex talking about collaboration and feedback, because you might have a private conversation on your portfolio just with one person giving feedback, or you might have a public one. So if we are transmitting things into another system, those rights should also be preserved, or you should be able to not transmit certain things that you do not want to have going over into another system.
We have interface and privacy and landscape. Shall we go with interfaces further? Or you want to jump right away to privacy? Oh, let's go for interfaces. So I think the big question here is really how the things are. What is the way to be connected? What is are there standard ways? Are there simple ways? So I'll name just one way which I find extremely simple. This is the way Canvas does it. When you share a portfolio, you just get the share button and it gets your link. Period. It just works. But there are very big drawbacks doing this. Authorized links, I think, would be a way. The big advantage is that it's super simple. Everyone understands it. The big disadvantage is that you can never remove one person from being authorized. So this is unrevocable.
But then how do you ingest that into another system, that link?
How do you what?
How do you ingest that link then into another system? Do you scrape the web pages then?
Yeah, then you have to. I mean, if you are another system to receive the content, then you just collect it, and in particular, you have the Canvas fluff around the HTML. That's clear. This is
an interface for humans, rather.
It's more for sharing, but you can definitely use it for machine.
Okay.
I'm this great guy in the whole ISOP project. I've been arguing like ages that scraping is a good idea. So, do you know what scraping is?
I was just wondering with this use case for us. We're a bit inside the technical development, and I give an example why we're discussing such things here. As Andreas already told you, that I'm doing this for years now, working with e-portfolios as an assessment. I'm not doing written exams, I'm not using oral exams, I'm just using e-portfolios. Why? I'm completely convinced of that. Yeah, it's the best way to understand what a student really learned. And I was a bit inspired by however, also by the work of Christian Spanagel. You might know him, because he started this way back when we were young, using blogs, web blogs, and having the students in the context of a lecture, writing down their essays, a diary, a learning diary in a weblog. And an interesting thing of that part was it was public. So he told me once, it was a very interesting situation that he in his lecture he talked about some American scientist, and suddenly this American scientist commented on the students' blogs. And they were, what's going on here? Yeah, I'm public, and this expert is really dealing with me. What's going on here? So the main idea I had in mind when starting also working with ePortfolios was have it public. Yeah, allowing students use whatever tool they would like to write their diary. It's their tool. The portfolio belongs to them. However, we had to learn that 90% of the students, they don't trust in public information and putting it abroad outside. So they rather would like to have a safe place like Mahara provides you. A dedicated ePortfolio system, which we connected to our Moodle system in our university.
You mean one of these fenced areas here, right?
It's a fenced area, exactly. Yeah. But nevertheless, there are these 10% still, yeah, which go outside, which have the workplace using the system, which is fine. However, well, from our point of view, doing this assessment and not trying to connect AI to it, to understand, tell me what is it, what a student has written. We're dealing now with very different systems. Yeah, and how to import that. How can we get this in our analysis? Yeah, so that's where we started with various technologies, and one of them is web scraping. Yeah, so we steal the data back from read it back from a web page somewhere.
As if you were the same web browser as the
Yeah.
professor.
Yeah, and just to get it in our pipeline for our analysis backend. For systems like Mahara, we can go another way. Yeah, we can use a dedicated API. Yeah, say provide us with some interface where we can say, give me the content, and then it's easy. But of course, these other public systems don't do that.
Carsten, how do you do this with your system?
I will explain later.
Oh, okay. So you don't want to be included here?
In export formats, yes, we do all of them, actually. So the API, I mean, do we go into the technical? I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
you could do it with a REST API, but would maybe it could become very complex in case of portfolio. So maybe you could also use a GraphQL interface. Sure. And there are other, but let's not dive too deep into it, but in a way. And the export formats, I mean, there are some formats like Deep2A, for example, which is, you feel like scraping if you use it in a way, a little bit, because it's there's a lot of, I don't know. I mean, I think where some of the data is lost in a way if you do it like this. And so you could also export it.
What data is lost, Carsten?
Which data is lost?
What data is lost?
So some of the
Is it the layout or?
yeah, so sometimes some of the layout gets lost, and sometimes maybe a little bit the context. I mean, you really have to reconstruct it in a way if you have multiple pages, and it's like the Reihenfolge, the
Order.
the order, for example, it's more or less you have to reconstruct it out of there's no real metadata about this, and so it's
That's
So I
interesting because
it's like HTML dump in a way. It's like an HTML dump.
Yeah, but it's the cleanest HTML dump. So I promise that with script data, you run a lot dirtier.
Yes.
I mean,
Try to-
Leap2A,
try
for
to
those
scrape.
that are not familiar with Mahara, Leap2A was developed many years ago in the UK as a portfolio standard to export portfolios from the same system to the same system, but also between systems. But not many are using it anymore, and it's XML based. So if you go from one Mahara to the other, it does retain your layout. It does bring the content along. It does bring comments along if you allow it, and therefore does allow pretty much a one-to-one import. So yeah, would need to be explored why it wouldn't work the same way when going somewhere else. But then, of course, every system displays things differently, and that was the challenge for Leap 2A, that the language was different between the systems, representations were different. Some systems didn't allow to represent content that existed in another system, and so on. So that's where I think challenges are for any export format, because the intaking system does need to understand it.
One thing that I would like to add with interfaces is the progressive aspect. So we want to be exchanging content, which is massive. We want video and so on. So we need some kind of a way to only transfer what's needed. And I think this is what's, for example, what's new, or what was changed, or what is not already transferred. And that's surprisingly something that Leap 2A is a zip. So, I mean, it's a complete zip. You don't transfer partial zips. You could, but
You could do a diff if you have both of them.
but zip diff don't exist. That's right. Rsync would offer that. Yeah. But yeah, zip diff. I like that, really. Because there are XML diff which do exist, so maybe this would be working. But, so I know one of the stupid things that we met as a consequence of using Leap 2A, we requested our students to download the Leap 2A export from Mahara to some own cloud instance, and they filled the disk. Because every export was taking 500 megabytes every time, and the poor system administrator wasn't cleaning the things on a super aggressive basis, so it was filling the disk right away. So this is, to me, this is one of the big difficulties of these interfaces, and I think the web is perfect.
It's a question if you want to have small export sizes, or you want to be really sure that the data is fair, because I mean, you like if the pictures and image would be public available, you just could say, just give me a text and layout and the links, but then you have to worry about these links are rotting and when they are gone. So probably you should be able to say, oh, I just want to have the text and the links for the media to make it small. Just for checking, for example, I just want to give somebody for archiving, I really get everything.
May I contextualize this once again a little bit to you guys, maybe in a bit? Yeah. So once again, going back to the practice, how are we doing that? Doing exams with or assessments with the e-portfolios. As I said, I'm not doing oral, or we are not doing oral exams. But the idea is that students come and they present the e-portfolio, and we discuss them. Of course, I will ask questions. Interesting thing is it's based on a portfolio, it's very easy to find the blind spots, but also the strengths, which is interesting, yeah, and an e-portfolio. So there is something like a situation where they present the e-portfolio. So of course, what we ask them is that they provide the e-portfolio, the finished portfolio at a deadline to us some days before. And something that we officially, since it's some combination, cannot really allow is that students work on the e-portfolio to the last minute. Yeah. So at that point, we someone also have to ask them to freeze the status of the e-portfolio. And we don't want to take away the access to the e-portfolio, because the e-portfolio is theirs, it's their product. But we need this freeze. We need this information, what has been there at the time of the deadline. And that's why we went this very complicated way, you may say, that they should not only provide us with an online access, so that we can access the portfolio and see what's there, but also with a status. And this status is this export.
And I have a question. Are you also grading on the fly when they are filling the diary, like
Formative
during the semester?
formative feedback. In fact, we really would like to do that. Because this would be would be great.
If only they would do it.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
but-
but because you talked about doing the summing up the different exports.
Yeah, yeah, we would really would like to do that. But as Andreas mentioned before in his presentation, the good thing is these portfolios are individual. The bad thing is they're individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are individual artifacts. It costs so much time really to go through them and provide a good feedback. And that's why some technology, AI-based, that would allow us to be quicker in assessing what's in there, where are the blind spots, where are the weaknesses, and so on, which would give us some help to provide this formative feedback. This would be so great.
We'll get back to landscape, but I think this kind of thing is likely to be useful if you apply the Finlay approach.
Yes.
This overview approach of saying like, the clusters, they don't taste anything currently. The whole classroom has done nothing. There's just a few spots here and there. This is and this kind of things might be more useful, I think, to the evolution. Nate, this is here the mouse, but this is not.
Let's check the Beamer system.
Es ist nicht Touch.
Das könnte Touch sein, ja, genau, richtig.
Eins kommt hinüber.
We have a bit. Yeah, Finlay.
Sorry, I'd just like to reinforce that point, the fourth point, which is that you want to be able to differentially choose which piece of data you want to transfer.
Yeah.
If you're going to get all of the portfolios for a thing, you might not want everything. If you've got an application for the teacher, that's a different application than an administrator. It's a different application than the student. You might want all the comments. Each time you ask for the data, you need to be able to cut and slice it in a different way. I think it's really important to maintain that idea. Often with transfer portfolios or transfer protocols, they like to be just serializing everything, and that's just not going to be sensible.
One shot thing. Yeah.
Sorry.
We're trying to bring the screen back. So currently we hear you well. Thank you. Okay, let's go further for privacy and security. And then we have landscape. Well, we could, no, I don't know. So here the question is, how can we arrange the whole thing to be so understandable, so transparent, that the people who give consent know what they give consent for, that they trust it, and that they can probably revoke this consent at any time. I think there is one answer which is pretty clear in the case of ISOP, temporary authorization. That means as long as you use it, you keep it, and when you finish using it, like after one day, you stop keeping it. So to me, this is the safest and the only valid answer we have found so far. But I'm sure there are better things. So if you do Google sharing, for example, sharing of Office words for Office documents, I think this works fairly well. Maybe Robert, you can answer us. How long is supposed to be lasting the authorization so there is an authorization system within Mahara. How long is this authorization system expected to continue, or do you just answer nothing on this?
Usually a university or an institution would say how long things like archives are meant to be kept. And so from Mahara systems point of view, we allow things to be kept as long as universities want them kept for. We don't have any inbuilt thing to automatically remove all data for a person. But if a person was to come to us and say, I want my account closed and I want my data deleted, there are systems for doing that. But once
But-
data's been sent from Mahara to another system, we don't have control over that. So that data won't get deleted if they ask for it to be deleted.
But so how do you adjust how long university allows? Is that one of the configurations?
It's
You don't
usually up
really
to,
configure it. It's kind of more of a
Yeah.
manual process.
so usually a university administrator for their particular Mahara site will decide how long to keep things, and it's up to them to manage accounts.
Okay.
Finley, do you know how do the occupational therapists agree to have their content pushed into your system? Is that part of their terms and conditions? Do you know?
Yeah, so we had to go through a specific authorization from the board, and with consultation, in order to achieve the transfer of the data to us from those other two Canadian systems. When we asked those Canadians, they immediately came back to the board and asked them, you know, who are these people and why are they asking for the data? And so that was a part of it. And then our usage of it was tightly governed by our role in the process. But I think it you know, to talk about Robert's point, I mean, you can't control data once it's gone to somebody else. You can't say, so all you can do really practically is ensure that you track who the data has actually gone to, and under what authorization that was made. If that party that you have sent it to chooses to use it for something else, that's no longer really something that you have control over. I mean, but I like the temporary authorization if you want to share something. That I use that all the time personally. I think it's a very nice way of getting
Yeah.
around the issue. But it's useful for, you know, can you have a look at this, please, kind of sharing. It's not useful for, can you process these 10,000 documents, please, and bring back a report in 3 weeks' time. That's not going to be helpful. So
Did
Right.
the occupational therapists also need to agree to have their data processed? Were they informed about that?
no, actually, I think they were originally. So when the data is supplied under their original terms and conditions, they are in fact requested. Now, whether that's a informed consent, it's hard to tell, because as you all know, terms and conditions get agreed without really being read. What we did also do, though, Christina, was undertake a pretty intensive communication program to make sure that everybody who might care had an opportunity to find out. But that can be, I mean, the whole process probably took about a year from when we started talking about it to when we actually started doing anything with the data.
So some universities in Germany have this encoded into their regulations. So just the regulation is saying, you know, your data is going to be automatically processed by this, by this, by that, and these are all the systems that our university uses, and we'll keep up this, you know, we'll maintain this thing even for research purposes. We can use it.
Yeah,
This is written somewhere on page 17. No one reads it and finished.
Especially private universities.
No. But even public ones do that.
I mean, many
I
organizations
think we
do
had
that.
Frankfurt as an example. I think.
It's not completely the way like you express it here. No, it's complex.
I think the responsibility, you know, to act in good faith for people is high, you know, and that does mean that you ultimately rely on the reputation and the integrity of the organizations that you share data with. Unfortunately, some large corporates have had changes in management, which have resulted in them just choosing to use data for purposes that it wasn't originally authorized for. And that has undermined a lot of people's confidence in those statements, essentially. So I think the trend is actually to making it harder. But there is no magic bullet here. And this is the short version. That it's not. I don't believe that there is a technological solution to this problem. This is a problem of trust and integrity.
But maybe
Culture.
yes,
I would say.
culture. And I mean, yeah, probably it's the question. Maybe at least you could prevent the data leaving the organization where the portfolio is hosted. Like, I mean, if, for example, in Bremen, we do host all of our AI on our own systems, and we don't push the data out to some other AI provider because then we lose the control.
That also means that, you know, you don't never open it in Word because they share most of the content.
Yeah.
That also means you never share it in Apple Books. Many different systems nowadays go much broader than
Yeah, but this would be a selling proposition of open source and other systems to say and to educate people about this. Christina,
I'm not sure.
that's a selling point.
Oh no, they are already there.
You just say that you can promise that you wouldn't share this information. This is a selling point for a university or for a provider, is it?
If you want to have people trust in your portfolio solution, you should really make sure that. I mean, if people share their portfolio as free, you can scrape it and all that on the net. And if there's a scraping bot finding your open, it's gone. That's right. But other stuff should be done in-house. For total trust. I mean, there has to be trust anyway, but
I mean,
even more.
I mean, just as an example, we weren't allowed to use, in the case of the occupational therapy e-portfolios, I think they were very strict about it. And so we weren't allowed to use any of the ChatGPTs and so on of the world.
Sure.
And that was a intentional decision on their part. I think, you know, I think it depends a lot on the context. In the case, you know, as you said before, a lot of people are using Copilot if they're writing code, or they're using, you know, Grammar Correct in Word. Those tools are sharing your document. So, yeah, it's a tricky, and it's a slippery thing to grab a hold of. I think it's not clear how to do.
I mean, with Windows recall in future, all the people using Windows will share their data in a way.
Yeah, we had our private university happily telling you, you don't need a home anymore. It's all going to be on the cloud. How happy aren't you?
I think what all of that highlights is that there's a lot of education to be done. And of course, a lot of education, especially around where does your data sit? Do you know where it sits? Do you know where it goes to? What happens with it? Who can read along when you install Grammarly or any of the other tools in your browser bar? That's a big piece of education that then in the end also needs to kind of not at the level where we are talking now, because I think all of us do understand the risks really well and also the affordances, of course, but it needs to go to a higher level, to managerial level, to CEO, CTO, CIO levels and so on, who can make the decision whether to buy certain software or not. And who can then also decide, okay, do we go with one cloud provider over another? And have that understanding, well, if you want to have data residency, or do you want to have data sovereignty, or do you need data sovereignty? Like in our case in New Zealand, quite a bit, especially when we're looking into data from Māori students, Māori participants. And so those conversations do need to be had and do need to, I think, still point very clearly to that area and reiterate what the potential downfalls are if one goes with, this is the easiest tool that is available versus, well, it does take longer, it costs more money to develop, but is it actually better for the students? Is it better for the data? Is it better for everybody who puts their stuff in, because they can have this trust into the system and be assured that their data is handled appropriately? I mean, Finlay, if you remember one of the earlier slides, the amount of consultations that I've read in those slides, having a researcher from a university review the process, have go through lots of paperwork and really ensure that the data doesn't go out of the country anymore. Because initially the data sat on Canadian servers, versus data shouldn't actually leave the country. So it should stay in New Zealand servers. So that's what they then also ensured, to bring the data back into the country in order to allow the organization actually to fulfill their legal requirements.
I've added some more.
I'm so glad to hear that the situation is not only bad here in Germany, but it's also quite funny in New Zealand. And I would say this would be the perfect topic for discussions later on in the reception with the beer. So you guys, you better fly over here.
Oh, Germany is better for privacy than. Oh, this is. Yeah, I agree. So I've added more education as an echo to your thing, and I added also more horror stories, because this is the only way you can educate managers. This is, I mean, it's only by having real incidents that happen that people revolt about, that people are going to be waking up on that, because otherwise it doesn't happen, as far as I know. So this is a mixed statement.
So educational horror stories or educational horror stories?
More education about privacy, more horror stories.
So I think-
Educational horror stories.
So there's a key point here that that the algorithm chart in New Zealand addresses. So the point is that the decision, when the manager is making the decision, they are responsible for the privacy of their students and users' data. They are personally responsible. We have a deep liability, which was introduced, that the manager can't revoke that liability, that they can't indemnify themselves by saying, oh, we hired this company, they're looking after it for us. Actually, that personal liability still sits with them, and you can remind them of that. And I don't know what the law is in Germany, but in New Zealand, we can remind the chief executive or the chair of the board, this decision is sitting with you, actually. And that usually focuses the mind. That usually changes them and moves them from, okay, you're saying that I'm responsible for this? Okay, let me understand this better. If people are really used to the idea that they are responsible for the balance sheet or the total revenue of an organization, they're expected to not run into the black and bankrupt the organization. Similarly, they are responsible for the health and safety of their staff in terms of buildings, in terms of fire alarm systems. And this is another example. This is the same thing. And I think that's the easiest way to get to so the horror stories is good because it motivates them. to understand where the problem is.
I see. Okay, you want to. I think it's similar in Germany. At least I don't remember having seen personal, but I've seen definitely. I mean, manager responsibilities. Okay. Shall we talk about landscape or shall we go for coffee?
Coffee.
Someone requested coffee here.
Will we see New Zealand again?
So
What do you understand with, say, with landscape?
landscape is in which environment are we evolving? So I think we talk about interviews. So taking the portfolio to interviews, that's one part of the landscape. But we're talking about evaluation. Wolfgang was saying that
Evaluation and assessment.
assessment of competencies normally.
Oh. Did you connect to ChatGPT?
Yeah.
This is the Maori ChatGPT. What do you say? They speak differently. I think these are classical things we want the landscape to be running about. We all depend, I think, on LMS. I think that's part of a LMS identities. I don't know. I think that might be enough. I mean, we all run on some.
So, I mean, self-presentation, like showing off what you have, what you can, what you are.
Oh, you mean the pride?
I mean, if people like a personal homepage or something like this.
Showcase, yeah, that's a good thing, yeah. Well, it's a beautiful conclusion, isn't it? Do you want to put more landscapes?
What do you mean with LMS identities?
So generally, e-portfolios are produced within institutions that are responsible for learning.
Yeah.
And they have a learning management system. And most of the time, the identity, the central identity is managed by these things.
So it should be an OAuth or some identity system, not just LMS. I mean, mostly it's single sign-on or something like that. Or...
Yeah, but this is the university identities. So there is this risk, for example, that you lose your portfolios when you leave the university.
Not necessarily.
But there is a risk.
No. Why a university identity?
Yeah.
I mean, in Europe at least, we're going into EID, European IDs, European student IDs. Why don't we have something like that as a basis? And then doesn't matter where the system is you're linked to.
Yeah.
Am I in a sabbatical in a foreign country at a different university? May I?
Sure. So I also would add OAuth. I would also add OAuth, and I mean, the most people probably would request to be able to check in with their Google or Apple account
Okay.
We have just been talking about both the not only technological issues, but something we didn't talk about for now is this big question. And in the morning, I have been in this here in a workshop, which was on AI in education. And I mean, the big question is here, how to deal with ChatGPT being available everywhere. Is something like an essay still something we can use for an assessment? So what about e-portfolio then?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there the right means for the assessment of the future in an AI-based world? So, do e-portfolios might have to change? Do we have to change the scenarios in a way?
Well, that's a question for the break.
It's for landscape, isn't it?
Well, okay, I can put the question here, but is the landscape changing because of the GPT bulldozer, right?
Yeah, very good. And also you could add to metadata, it would be like a diff or like if you look, for example, at the repository on GitHub, you see how people just pushed all the commits into it, and this data has to be saved as well. So see, I mean, if you really want to emulate it, it becomes really hard to do, and then you can do everything. But to show when did the people really write, did we do it constantly, or did we just in one push, and then we have this 120-page e-portfolio? Very productive day.
Okay.
So, I mean, will we have another slide like dreams? So,
Dreams?
dreams.
Oh, yeah.
Dreams of the future, what would we like to see?